Okay, so let's go ahead and begin the session. So today's we are going to look into the framework called Hibernate and the importance of Hibernate. What are the impacts of Hibernate in the database world? And I hope this presentation will give you a clear picture of an ORM concept with Hibernate and also choose your career path in ORM perspective. Okay, and myself, I am Sagar. So I am an enterprise architect and I am in the enterprise world, the database architect domain for a period of 10 years now. More than a decade, I am heavily working on the database architect solutions and also providing an ORM technology solutions. And I myself today will be going over the picture of Hibernate, what Hibernate is all about, to what extent Hibernate has dominated in the database world, why Hibernate is so much important, and what are the limitations or what are the features of Hibernate. And to an extent, we'll be also looking at finally a demo at the end of the session. Okay, yeah. So probably this is the first attempt from Edureka in Hibernate. This is the first time Hibernate is introduced in Edureka. And about Edureka is one of the leading global online training provider. Apart from this, we have a lot of other courses also. And it's a very easy, user-friendly kind of online training environment. That's what Edureka provides. It's a powerhouse of online training educations. Okay, so with these informations, let's go ahead and look into some of the core concepts of Hibernate and what they are all about. Okay, so objectives of this webinar will be looking at basically what is the persistence is all about and what is Hibernate and how Hibernate is related with persistence. What is ORM? We have been keep on discussing on ORM for a longer period of time. How Hibernate is integrated with ORM, some of the benefits, and also we'll look at a real-time use case where Hibernate is very heavily used, and also we'll be looking at some of the use cases, some of the demos at the end of the session. Okay, so this is what a traditional database application is facing today. As a database application, in any database application, the complexity is the vendors of the databases. So as a Java program, when we are trying to communicate with database, there are a lot of constraints out there. So for example, we have to be aware of which database we have to connect. We should be aware of who's the vendor of the database, what is the version. So there are a lot of complexities involved in the current flow. So even though you have a JDBC API, a user-friendly API of JDBC, in a production kind of environment, on a real-world environment, consider we have developed an application using Hibernate with MySQL kind of database. All of a sudden, in the production or in the development perspective, the management is now deciding it's fine MySQL, we will shift to another database called Oracle. So at that point of time, we end up in more complex scenarios. We end up changing a lot of code. There are a lot of manual interactions in the code is required. So when a database and the Java speaks together, the problem is it's getting extremely complex. The complex, let's put it another way. There may be scenarios where we need to select or work with two databases at the same time. So we need to fetch the data from one database called MySQL. We need to provide the information to other database called Oracle. So as the complexity keeps growing, as the data definition keeps growing, even though Java is having a very clean API called JDBC, a Java database connectivity, which has the capacity to execute SQL statements on Java, but the bottom line is the complexities of the database vendors. We always becoming a database dependent kind of language. So as I said, if half of the application has been developed with MySQL And down the line, if you are trying to say, let's stop this database, let's go with another database. So basically the complexities are, we need to come up a database independent development. Okay, so we basically need to be in a situation where a database independent development has to go. Okay, so that is what the important criteria of developing a framework called as Hibernate. Okay, in a real-time world development application where a Java database development comes up. So for example, you have a Java-based development and you have a database development. So if you have a Java and a database kind of development going in between, so in a very real-time world scenario, down the line of the application development, maybe after the span of time, after a certain period span of time, if there is a requirement comes up by telling change of database, okay, so this is going to impact in a greater extent. Okay, this is going to impact to a very greater extent because the Java code which has been developed with database, which is for MySQL, all of a sudden we are trying to say, for example, the database like MySQL, some data types will be supported, like varchar, etc., all those kind of things. In Oracle, they may not be supported. Correct. So these database dependencies are there to a greater extent. Okay. So we need to provide a solution or a programmatic perspective of where if we develop for one database, the same thing should be used for all other databases. So I don't want to change my code. I won't change anything anywhere. If I am writing a CRUD application, CRUD, when I say CRUD, if I write an application with a create, read, update, delete for an operation, I won't change any code anywhere. I will be using the same amount of code across all databases, irrespective of whatever may be the scenario. So who can provide me that flexibility? So this side Java is there, this side database is there. So we are now trying to point to say we can have multiple databases, but same code should be executed across multiple databases. We are not bothered about what is the version of the database, how the database has been built up. To an extent, we are not even bothered about the table structure also. I will be writing one common code for all databases. So this is the bottom line problem we are discussing here. Okay. So who's the person can solve it? Okay. So that is the terminology called as ORM. Okay. Object-Relational Mapping Framework. Fine. An object-relational mapping framework which has come up in the picture, which explains to an extent that instead of querying the tables, instead of querying the databases, why can't the communication can happen with Java objects? So the point what ORM brings up here is, you have a Java object. In that Java object makes communication with the database. So traditionally, instead of doing the application in this kind of scenario, the point what ORM is trying to make is, instead of speaking to the tables in the database, let's speak to the Java objects directly. Okay, so ORM goes one step ahead. It's trying to say, let's not speak to the tables directly. Let's not do any CRUD operations with the tables directly. Let's do all the operations via the communication person itself. Who's the communication person here? The Java object. So the concept of ORM gave a very big picture now. So what they are trying to say is that Java as a language is going to remain same for all the databases. We are not going to have a different Java language for Oracle. We are not going to have a different Java language for MySQL, nothing. For all the databases, the same Java language is going to be used, which is very clear. So why we have to do a CRUD operation against the database. Let's do the CRUD operations against the object itself. We will have a framework who will there speak from the Java object to the database. Okay, that's where ORM comes up in the problem. Object relational mapping. ORM means an object relational mapping, which now says perform CRUD operations on the Java objects itself. I, as a framework called ORM, will migrate the statements, whatever Java object is telling, to the underlying database. So instead of directly making a communication to the database, let's make the communication to the Java objects so that you are going to perform an insert, read, update, delete operation now on the object, not on the database. So you are going to be hidden with the database and you are going to be spoke only with the person, a Java object there, who is same for all the databases. Okay, that's how ORM came up in the picture. So now what ORM is trying to say is that I can do mapping with your Java objects irrespective of the databases so that the same Java language can be used for multiple databases also. So now down the line, you developed a project which has been running in MySQL. Now you have taken MySQL, you are trying to replace with Oracle, or you are trying to replace with some other database. There will be no impact. Why? Because still I am going to work with the Java object only and I am not going to worry on the database. The person ORM is going to taking the responsibility of transferring from the Java objects to the database. So this is now a total developer friendly application where they are trying to point is that do everything on the Java objects itself. The framework will migrate from what Java objects is doing to the underlying database. By doing this, we achieve a database independent programmatic approach. So now what happens? Now the point they're trying to make is that you had a Java before, then you had a database before. Okay, so now they're trying to say, let's put one more layer called ORM here. As a developer, you concentrate only in this layer. Okay, so if this layer is going to keep changing, one never needs to worry because you are performing operations on your Java layer, not on the database layer. It's up to the ORM to take responsibility of the information given from the Java side to a database. Okay, so now we coming to a solution of, okay, we analyzed, we found a perfect solution. So going back to the slide. Okay, now all of them are happy. So ORM says, yes, I am going to take care. The database says, I am not worried. Now I will be MySQL Oracle. Java says, I am also not worried. So we are coming to a bottom line. User-friendly operation language, database independent language is achieving by a person in between layer called as ORM. So to achieve a database independent language and to achieve a very user-friendly development language, the architecture now, we should have a Java language, the ORM and the database. Okay, so far clear from everybody? Okay, so now everything has been told, everything has been defined, etc. Everything is fine. Who is going to handle this ORM layer? Which user can't handle it, programmer can't handle. So we need a person or a framework who can handle it. That is called as Hibernate. So Hibernate is a ORM framework. The terminology is very, very important. Hibernate is an ORM framework. Okay, as the name ORM suggests, fine. It's an object relational mapping kind of framework. Okay, so this Hibernate is going to take away the responsibility of what ORM is doing. So as a Java developer, you can concentrate on working with the objects. From the database side, you can just concentrate on only pointing to the tables. So Hibernate is going to sit in between the Java code and the database code, and it's going to take complete responsibility of transferring the instructions given from Java to the underlying database. So Hibernate is one of the best ORM frameworks so far achieved. Okay. So we'll be seeing in detail now what Hibernate is going to do. Yeah, so Doing is asking question, what are other ORM tools apart from Hibernate? There are a lot of other tools from Hibernate, like iBatis is there, MyBatis is there. There are a lot of other ORM frameworks is there, but Hibernate is very, very effectively used because it's tightly coupled with Java APIs, JavaX persistence APIs. Fine Doing. We'll be looking in details now why Hibernate is heavily followed compared to other frameworks. Is there any specification for this? Okay, so what Hibernate basically does today is, today's Java itself, the Java language itself is having an API called as JPA, Java Persistence API. Today's standards, Hibernate is following the complete standard of JPA. JPA starts supporting Hibernate. That's why Hibernate is very heavily followed. Okay, so the Java Persistence API, which is coming from Oracle. Okay, so today JPA starts supporting Hibernate. So Hibernate and JPA are used together. There is no differences from today's Hibernate 4, Hibernate 3.x. Hibernate and JPA are used together. Okay, fine, Anand. So you will be watching Hibernate and JPA are used together in all the application in today's market world. So to now we are in an extent where JPA has adopted Hibernate, so all the applications will be a combination of Hibernate and JPA. Fine, Anand? Yeah. What are the implementations we have for JPA in the market? Hibernate is one of the implementations. EJBs are the other implementations. So there are a lot of other implementations for JPA is also there. EJB is one of the implementation. Hibernate is one of the implementation. Okay. Spring also does a JPA kind of implementation. Fine, Anand? A top link is again there is a huge amount of ORM frameworks available, top link, etc. Okay, the reason why Hibernate heavily used, because Hibernate is the only first framework was adopted by JPA to a greater extent, and also Hibernate provides a very flexible ORM solutions and query functions, a very friendly query functions compared to all other frameworks. It's having a very, very user friendly query functions. Query related functions. Okay, that's another powerful responsibility of Hibernate. And also Hibernate is having a very good catch mechanism. Hibernate is having a very, very good catch mechanism. Okay, it can catch the data also. Okay, fine. So there are some features which makes Hibernate to be selected better than all other frameworks, which we'll be discussing in detail. EJB is not an ORM framework. JPA is used in EJB as an ORM framework. Fine, Murli? EJB is not, JPA is used as an. Is the questions answered on it? Yeah. So now, finally, we have a linkage of all the three. We have an ORM, we have a Java, and we have a your database. So how this can be achieved now? How we are going to achieve this? Right. So this is very, very critical. How we are going to achieve this? So in order to understand how we are going to achieve this, let's step one step back. Let's understand first of all what is persistence. Why persistence is a very, very critical terminology. Okay. In any data storage mechanisms, in any data block mechanisms, persistence means storage of the data. They are the basic building block. Only if you store the data, you can perform any operations on the data. Correct? Without storage of data, one cannot do any level of operations on the data. Okay. So persistence, mainly the role of persistence in a ORM kind of framework is basically to store the state of an object. Okay. To store the state of an object means whatever the current state of an object. If an employee object is created with name, age, and area, So that data should be persisted in the database. So persistent in ORM framework points to storing the state of an object. Whatever the current state of an object, we should be able to in a position to persist that in the database. So persistent is one of the most important building blocks in any application. The more you have a very powerful mechanism for storing the data, then only you can analyze the data. So in order to start with any framework, we have to make sure we have a very good persistence layer attached to the framework. Okay? And also the persistent layer normally happens through databases. Most of the databases. So Santosh is asking the question, what's the difference between JPA API and Hibernate API? Why do we use another JPA API? Okay, Santosh, to answer your question, we are using a mix of JPA and Hibernate API from these days. JPA is a Java persistence API which has come across common for all the platforms. So what Java don't want is, they don't want other APIs to design the other table structure. Okay, so Hibernate APIs can be used for querying, searching, storing, reading, etc. Fine. But what Java wants is one common API should be used for defining the table structure. Okay. So in most of the applications these days, for defining the table structure, we have a common API called Java Persistence API. Once you define the table, how we are going to search, how we are going to query, how we are going to store, it's up to your API power mechanism. But what Java standards want is, the person who is defining the actual columns and actual tables should be a common API used across all the platforms. That's why JPA came up in the market. So JPA takes responsibility of defining the tables. Okay. So yes, all the ORM frameworks uses JPA these days. Yes. Okay. But it's not mandatory. It's optional. It's not mandatory. You must use JPA. What Java is suggesting, we have a general API called JPA. Go ahead and use it. It's up to the framework to decide whether to use or not. Most of the framework these days uses JPA with redirection, so that they make sure, even though if the development organization is keep changing the frameworks, the table structure API will always remain same. Okay. But it's up to the development perspective to decide whether to use JPA or not. But Java standard suggests JPA is the correct way to construct the table kind of information. Okay, fine, Santosh. Okay, so it's not mandatory for all the frameworks to use JPA, but if you use JPA, it's good. It's good. That's what the practice they are trying. So Hibernate, as we said, it's found by Gavin King at 2001, targeted completely towards the relational database and open source library. And as I said, the powerhouse of Hibernate is, when you compare with other frameworks, it provides a very easy query language. It has a very, very powerful mechanism of query language compared to other databases, other ORM frameworks. It has a very good catching and the technologies. See, generally, there are a lot of ORM frameworks around, like TopLink, iBatis, etc., all those kind of things. But why Hibernate is because of only three major reasons. In the mechanisms of all the frameworks provided, you can never see a very strong query API given by Hibernate across by other frameworks. Secondly, the catching mechanisms. Hibernate itself takes responsibility of catching the complete mechanisms. Third is the dialects. Almost Hibernate is having huge support for all the databases. Okay, and the most another important thing is 80% of the database applications across the globe are using Hibernate these days. Like Cisco using an Hibernate, and lot of e-commerce applications are really using Hibernate because of this catching and the query capacities what Hibernate is having. It can easily come up with a concept of joins by using its query function effectively. Okay. Those powerful mechanisms, search mechanisms, Hibernate search mechanisms are a very greater advantages. Okay. So each and every ORM framework will be balanced by the future what they support. So Hibernate's main backbone is this. Hibernate opens up, it says, Hibernate is not trying to prove that that is the best ORM framework, but Hibernate futures makes it the best. Okay. Hibernate futures, like, see, if you have some 10 tables, And if your framework is able to provide a very simple query mechanism to fetch all the 10 tables via Java objects, that is the impact is required. Querying is a very, very important impact. We don't want to query like 30 lines or 40 lines. We should be able to easily query. Okay. Telling all this, the most critical functionality from Hibernate is inheritance. The Hibernate supports inheritance. It's almost supporting all the concept of hoops. Hibernate will support polymorphism. It will support inheritance. So if you have an interface, if the interface is implemented by multiple classes, even you can store those instances who's implementing also. It will go to that much level. Okay, that's why Hibernate was considered now even considered is one of the top frameworks because of the features it supports. And if you see the number of implementations happen in Hibernate, it's very, very difficult to point out a company where Hibernate is not used. Okay, particularly now Hibernate is heavily used because it's following the complete standards of what JPA is trying to do. So Hibernate, if you see now, the table definition structure is completely given in the hands of JPA. Once the table is defined, once you got the Java objects, Hibernate is clearly defining only the rules and principles to be followed on the Java object. They are not even touching the annotations of JPA. That's why Hibernate is very, very critical. So the features, the bullet points, the most important backbone bullet points, the inheritance, the polymorphism supported, it supports polymorphism. It is very, very critical. The caching technologies, the powerful query language. These differentiates Hibernate from all other frameworks. And another important thing, it's already a very huge framework which is having a lot of versions. Today we are in a version of Hibernate 4.x, which is having support for NoSQL databases. Probably this is the first framework to go to that extent. Hibernate is now having support for NoSQL databases also. Okay. Fine. So persistence with Hibernate, yes. The main intention why Hibernate came was to solve the EJP2 persistence architecture. When Hibernate came up in the market, I mean a decade ago, right? A decade or more than a decade ago, EJP was used very widely. But the problem of using an EJP kind of architecture was, it was extremely complex. Believe me or not, I was part of the EJP development. I'm not talking about EJP3, I'm talking about EJP2. To persist a data, it's so complex. You have to define a lot of configuration files. You have to take responsibility of the container. You have to handle the life cycle of the container. It's like to do a persistence of a simple object, you might have writing lot of Java classes, lot of entity classes, lot of persistence classes. It's like you will feel like finally I will directly do a select star from data. Believe me or not, this is really accurate. The way the complexity EJP2 was bringing was, instead of solving the problem, it ended up creating more problems. So we want a solution of database independent, but the EJP2 architecture was so complex, it was gone to a greater extent where it's very, very difficult to manage a life cycle of objects itself. So there only Hibernate stepped up. It came with a very simple concept by telling, we will give you a framework, a POJO framework. So point is, EJP is not an ORM tool. EJP is a framework of doing everything. ORM is a small part of EJP. Fine doing. EJP is a huge perspective. Enterprise Java means a huge perspective. ORM is a small part of EJP. EJP does messaging, everything, etc. But the ORM concept of EJP was extremely concept. That's the point I'm trying to make. Fine. So what Hibernate started to take the approach in a different way, what they told is this: we will give a framework. As a developer, you don't need to worry anything about the database. First point. The second point they're trying to say, it's a POJO framework. So what they're trying to say is that probably Hibernate was the most successful POJO framework I might have seen. So they're trying to say, if you have a class A, probably to become a framework class, you will be extending some class. Or you will be implementing some class. Hibernate says not required. You don't want to extend any class. You be a simple class. Very, very critical. Hibernate steps up and says, forget about everything, throw it outside. be a very normal Java class, be a very simple plain old Java object class. As a framework, I will take responsibility of migrating from your class to other things. Okay, so just think, the framework a decade ago brought all these kind of operations by asking developer to only write a simple Java class. Okay. That is where Hibernate was heavily targeted and it was heavily used. Okay. Once Hibernate came up, then a lot of other ORM frameworks came, but as I said, each and every release of Hibernate is adding a bank feature, a very important feature of static. As I said, the 4.x feature is now we have a support for NoSQL database. We have support for NoSQL database. Okay. So, as everybody knows, what is an RDBMS, a relational database management system? Just I have put a slide in just I want to make sure that even though whatever Hibernate does, end of the day, Hibernate will always transform the statements as per the database statements only. Okay. So, for example, if the user is trying to do some operation with the Java objects, whatever the case, end of the final day, the final movement, the final shot is Hibernate reads the corresponding Java language by using the ORM framework. But while speaking to a relational database management system, at a final shot, Hibernate will always use the SQL only. It always uses only the SQL as a point of contact with database. That transformation from the Java language to the query language, what database wants, Hibernate takes care. But I just want this slide to bring up a very clear point that Hibernate, again at the end of the day, will execute the native SQL statements only. On the back side, they will keep on executing only the native SQL statements. Fine. So it's like this. Hibernate sits up here. The Java language, the Java program sits here. Hibernate sits here. Okay, good. And what happens? The database comes up here. So here it understands by using ORM, the Java, everything. And here it is going to execute only a plain SQL statements at the end. Always a plain SQL statement at the end. Okay, ORM. As we already saw a lot of information on ORM. So ORM is simply nothing but an object relational mapping. So what ORM is trying to do is that it basically tries to map the Java object to a particular entity in the table. So for example, what ORM is trying to do is, if you have a Java class, for example, in this application itself, I bought a Java class. Fine. So if you see, for example, if you have a Java object, something like this, int id, string name, etc. What ORM will do is that it will map to the corresponding table. So this id's value will be populated to this id. This name value is populated to this name. And who is doing it? Hibernate will do it. So Hibernate will read the Java code here, will write the corresponding SQL statement to update here. As simple as it's the state of a Java object and it writes it here. And it's going to be extremely transparent. Means you can see the SQL statement it is executing. While doing a demo, one can see the SQL statements it is executing in between. Okay. So Hibernate layer. So basically, an Hibernate layer in a typical web-based application sits at the last. So if the user will be facing the presentation layer, as a user I will be always facing the presentation layer, and I will be always having a service business layer which will be transforming the request from the presentation layer to the persistent layer, and Hibernate will be the last final point of contact will happen in any application in the database. Okay, so Hibernate in other ways we'll also call it as the repository layer. Hibernate is also called as a repository layer which sits at the end speaking to the database. Okay. The advantage of having a layer of like Hibernate at the end is, so this guy is going to hide all the complexities here to the rest of the layers. So even though if you're going to change the database to a greater extent, these layers will never get affected, only this layer will be affected. That's why Hibernate layer is a final layer or final point of contact in your application. So benefits of Hibernate, yes, the major benefits of Hibernate, it can generate SQL statements. It's a database independent. Effective caching framework, irrespective of any database, it can execute any type of SQL statements. And the business benefits, it's an open source. One doesn't need to worry about investing in it. It's going to be very faster development time because you are now not worried what is the table, what is primary key, what is you get access hypothetical questions. So knowledge is okay, knowledge in order to communicate with the tables because Hibernate is tightly coupled with Java. And if you have an advantage of understanding what is an Eclipse, etc., it's an added advantage, but that's fine. That's not a mandatory one. Okay, fine. Okay, so far any questions from anybody? So far any questions, please? You are able to hear me now? So far any questions, please? Okay, what do you mean by Hibernate tools? I'll be coming up that, Anand. I'll be explaining what is Hibernate tools. I'll be explaining what is Hibernate tools in detail. I'll be coming there. Fine, Anand? How Hibernate understands Java and SQL language. Okay, that's the part of the framework, Santosh. So, end of the day, what they will be doing is they use the underlying JDBC API only, the Java Database Connectivity API only, correct? So, Java data, they already have an API called Java Database Connectivity. What basically it will do is that they will be speaking to the driver of the database. Okay. Yes, internally everything will be again using JDBC only. Yes, Santosh. Internally, end of the day, they should be using only the concepts of drivers only. They will be having the capacity. But what Hibernate does is that it's having its own driver configurations. It's having its own driver configurations. For example, for each and every database, it's having its own dialect. Okay. That's the advantage of using Hibernate. Is Hibernate going to increase programmer productivity? Obviously, Gurudev. See, so for example, if you want to join some 5 to 10 tables, think about the complexity instead of speaking with 10 different Java objects. So which will be easier. Correct. You have to put in that perspective. So obviously speaking with Java objects will be easier, right? I believe Hibernate supports NoSQL databases now. Yes, doing. Hibernate is supporting NoSQL databases. Okay. For mapping the best way, you should use XML annotations. I will come there, Kiran Kumar now. So let's consider a very important scenario called means complexity of a real table. So if you see here, you have a student ID and a course number. It's a completely complex scenario where everybody is depending on everybody. The student ID is depending on the class, this guy is depending on that, and the report card is depending on this, the tuition bill is depending on this. If somebody is asking you to at least understand the structure itself is going to be very complex. So for example, if you have to consider what are the registrations, which are the student ID belongs to which registration. So this is going to be very, very complex program, right? So in order to solve this, the option we have is to provide an object-oriented database system. So instead of having different databases instead of speaking with different layers. So what is the point they are trying to say is that let's speak with different Java objects. Because if you are able to speak with different objects, the advantage of speaking with different objects is with objects the object-oriented relation will be a lot easier. Hear me? Can you hear me now? How are you doing? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Sorry about that. I was just changing the slide, so that's what happened. Okay. So there's a question from Santosh asking, as per ORM is storing as object, is it any serialization, deserialization is happening here while storing a data? Okay, Santosh, to answer your question, the moment it's moving from Java objects to database, it is doing a transformation of objects into an SQL statements. It's reading the Java objects and SQL statements. That is very important. It's not persisting the Java objects. It's a very good question, Santosh, but the point what Hibernate is trying to do is that it's not going to store the objects, correct? It is just reading the objects, understanding the objects, and writing the SQL statements. Only the SQL data is going and storing them. It's not the Java objects getting stored. Got it, Santosh? So no need to worry about serialization and deserialization. It's reading the Java objects, then it's going ahead and writing the corresponding SQL statements. Yeah, so that's our point we have to understand. So let's take a very real-time use case of Hibernate, an e-commerce app. So a very big e-commerce application, now there is large number of users are there. The more the number of users are there, the domain of the users are large to a greater extent. So a very big application normally cannot depend on one database. Obviously, it's going to be depend on multiple databases. Let's put another scenario. You want to develop an e-commerce application where the database will be user's choice. Even you don't have the choice. User can step ahead and say, listen here, in my environment, Oracle works fine. Somebody can say, in my environment, MySQL works fine. So we have to develop an application where it is trying to say, whichever the choice of the database selected by the user should be supported. So what is the problem of something like this? What is the problem of developing an application needs to support different databases? So user will say, I can use any database of my choice, still the application should be supported. So the problem of using something like that will be, if the user choice databases are allowed, so we'll be executing different queries. So MySQL queries are different. For example, Oracle is having supports like some functions, okay, which is supported by MySQL. Okay. And what about the searching? If I want to search, how I'm going to speak with different databases? For example, one product can come from MySQL, another product can come from Oracle. So I have to search across different databases, not only one databases. So how I'm going to customize all these things? This is a real scenario the user is facing these days. You can't always say I will use only one database because some databases are having very good features compared to other databases. So each and every database is having their own features, etc. And this database list will be keep growing. It's not only today, right? The number of databases across the globe is going to be keep growing to a greater extent. So if you are developing a very huge e-commerce application, you should be in a position to select any databases of user choice. If you select of user choice, then you should be in a position to speak with all the databases. So there are only two solutions. One, you should be speaking to each and individual databases, or you should use only one common language to speak with all databases. So in these two options, which option is better? Option 1 or option 2? Can you get an answer? Better or option 2 will be better? Studying one common language. Can you get a quick answer for everybody? Which option is better? Option 1 or option 2? Yes, yeah. So option 2 is going to be the better solution, exactly, because now you can have only one common language or one common tool which can be used by different people in different databases. So instead of speaking to different databases and bringing up the individual languages, now which can be used by across all the databases. Okay, so that's how a general use case has been solved these days. We'll have a general tool called Hibernate in between that will take care of speaking to different databases. And also the advantage of using a tool like this, it's going to provide Hibernate itself is having a very good rich feature of search library, which makes sure the searching features can be easily achieved to a greater extent. Okay, and also Hibernate itself can define the transactions on a particular use case. If user is going to make a lot of transactions, Hibernate takes care of creating the transaction and closing the transactions also. Okay. So Hibernate tools, what are these Hibernate tools? So Hibernate tools is something which came up with Hibernate. For example, in your database, if you are having 50 tables and you have to create Java objects for all those 50 tables. Consider in that scenario, you have to create Java objects for all the 50 tables. It's going to be extremely tough. So what Hibernate tools can do is that you can take the tables, if you point out the tables, automatically Hibernate will be able to provide all 50 Java classes. It's a tool, if you point to the corresponding database, it will understand whatever the schema of the database, it understands what are the table structure look like. Equivalently, it can create corresponding tables and the table definitions. It can do the reverse also. From here, it can be a Java code. So for example also, which we'll see in an example now. Okay, it can also provide the reverse engineering also. So for example, let's go ahead and look some of the demos. So before looking at the demo, can I get a quick yes so that we can go ahead and see that? Hi, are you there? Can you able to hear me? I'm audible? Hi, everybody is there? Can you able to hear me? Is this clear now? Yeah, please, thanks for confirming. So can we, okay, fine, sorry about it. Yeah, fine, sorry. So can we go ahead and look, yeah, fine, thanks, sorry about it, okay. So can we go ahead and look at the demo, please? Okay, so let's take a particular CRUD operation, which I am going to do here. Can you all able to see my Eclipse? Can you able to see the Eclipse here? Can you please confirm? Yeah. So we have a branch table. Okay. So we have a branch table, means a branch class. This branch class is having something called branch ID, branch name, and branch status. A very simple Java class, right? You are able to see a very simple Java class. It's having three fields called as branch ID, branch name, and branch status. These are the three fields available in my corresponding Java class. So I am having a file called as Hibernate configuration.xml file, which is telling all the database properties, to which database I have to connect to, what is the username, what is the password, and it's holding one important file called as branch.hbm.xml. Okay, so let's go and see this branch.hbm.xml. If you see this branch.hbm.xml, this is telling whatever you are going to do for this particular class, a table will call branch underscore table will be created, and those corresponding fields will be created as branch name and branch status in my database. Okay, so I am going to execute by reading that Hibernate cfg.xml, and I am creating a simple branch, giving the name of the branch, giving the branch ID. Okay, so now I am going to run this application. So application is running. So if you see down the line, it's telling I have inserted, that's what the point I am trying to say. It reads the Java class and updates the same into the database. So now, if you go ahead and see your database, we not even created a table, it was empty. So now if you see show tables, one can see that a table called branch underscore table is created. So if you say now select star from branch underscore table, you can see whatever the statements we created, it's already available here. Okay, same thing can be done with annotations also. Whatever we are doing, the same thing can be done with annotations also. So for example, the same branch.java, instead of pointing in an XML file, you can also use the JPA annotation. So this is where the JPA comes up. Add entity, add table, etc. All those kind of things. Okay. So can I get a yes, note as executing, it taken the corresponding table and it start inserting the corresponding table in the data. So this is the power of using a tool called as Hibernate. Okay, and also as discussed in the use case, Hibernate is very heavily used in order to solve this particular scenario problem. The problem what? If we have multiple databases of user choice, it can still go ahead and execute the same amount of statements across everywhere. Okay. So if you are going ahead with the course, you will be watching these are the corresponding things will be covered, like introduction to ORM and Hibernate, explaining the session factory in detail, what are the different types of association, inheritance in Hibernate, the query language of Hibernate, how the transactions filter and performance is supported, OGM. This is the concept where NoSQL comes up in the picture. After doing everything, you'll be also getting a level 2 for doing a project. So in that project, you'll be experiencing a real-time scenario of how can you do it. And adding all this, you'll get a lifetime support from Edureka. It means whatever the classes we are taking in online will be uploaded. You will be for each and every corresponding model, you'll be having a quiz. You'll be having a 24-bar support, and also you'll be provided a certificate from Edureka for doing the course. Any questions from anybody regarding the session we had so far? I hope everybody here had a very good idea on Hibernate, right? Any questions? Any questions is welcome, please. How much does the course cost? Gurudev, you can see the corresponding course cost in. You can see the corresponding course cost in the Edureka website, Gurudev. Okay, So as I said, Hibernate is very, very critical in the database perspective and particularly in the Java enterprise perspective because of the capacity it is having, the powerful APIs it is supporting, and also it's very critical because it's completely an JPA oriented API. So it can go in the same way as how your normal database supports these tests. Okay. Any questions from others? Any questions from anybody in the participants? I hope you all got a very clear picture on what Hibernate. Yes, Santosh. Yes, please go with the question, Santosh. Yes, Santosh. What is the question, Santosh? Using annotation, it decreases the readability of the code. Okay, Santosh. See, to answer this, it's first thing, Hibernate is not forcing to use annotations. You can either use annotations, you can also use XML. But the idea of using annotations these days is to bring everything in a programmatic control. Okay, that's the idea. So if you see the annotation domination is coming to a greater extent because we don't want a file-based configuration. Creating one XML, it's a very, very tedious process. Okay, annotations upfront also defines you very clearly what can be done. For example, when there is a table, on watching the program itself, you have full control of what can be done. And as a Java perspective programmer, you can control fully in the Java side language instead of XML kind of things. That's why annotation comes up in the picture. Got it, Santosh? Instead of you can understand the readability of the code, the powerful background of annotations, it defines the code at that layer itself, right? It defines at entity. It's clearly defining, okay, this is now should be acted as a table entity. That's the power of using annotations. Got it, Santosh? Which version currently industry is using? Industries will be using around 4.0 now because 4.0 started supporting the NoSQL. As I said, right, the most important feature of Hibernate, each and every year if you see it comes up with important feature. Now it is supporting the NoSQL. Correct? Do you recommend to use annotation when compared XML? Because if you use annotation, if there is small change. Yes, Anand, exactly. You are the same point. Which gives the better performance? Performance, it's not going to be a greater factor because of cache concept is there in Santosh, in Hibernate. Hibernate cache concept is always, Hibernate is having a very, very powerful performance tuning background. So we don't really not to worry about performance to such greater extent. Fine, Santosh. So it's having its caching technologies, so performance tuning it can give a very bigger concept. So that's what the point. XML and annotation is not going to make that much difference because it's having its own way of handling caching and tuning, etc. Okay. So regarding the course cost and the course launch, you can go to the Edureka website. You can also contact your Edureka admin. I think Jan 10th is the course is going to start. It will be a very exciting course to learn. In the database world, Hibernate is very, very critical. Okay. What is first level and second level cache? Yes, Kiran, actually, those will be explained in course details. But to give a better picture, first level and second level cache are the internal components cache of Hibernate, where the objects which are queried again and again will be cached. So that when the same object is queried again, they can bring from the cache itself. Where there is a second level cache, Hibernate provides opportunity for other caching frameworks to integrate with themselves. So if you have very powerful cache framework, you can even use that framework with Hibernate also. Got it, Kiran? It's really good to see a very interactive session. I think more the questions, it's very interactive actually. Yeah. Fine everybody then. So please go ahead and try to yourself participate in the course. It's a very interesting course to learn with. As I said, you'll be going and looking at and more in the Hibernate perspective, you can check with Hadoop admin also on the course level. Okay. In the industry, annotations are widely used to it. Annotations are the most widely used in the industry today. Okay. Yeah. Charges of the course, Swapan, sorry. You can check with Edureka. You can go to the Edureka website. You can see the Edureka website for the course. At the same time, you can also check with the Hadoop admin. Okay. Fine, Swapan. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from anybody before winding up the session? Okay, then. So fine, everybody. Then really thanks for the session. Thanks for participating in the session. Thanks for making yourself available for the session. I hope the session gave you a very clear picture on what Hibernate is able to do. What are the capacities? I won't say I covered everything in Hibernate. That's not possible. But I made sure the important impacts of what Hibernate is doing in the database world. And please go ahead and try to yourself register for the course. Make yourself available for the course. Thanks for the participation, and thanks everybody, and I hope you had a very good session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.